listeners. Welcome to Grief Out Loud. Remember the last time you tried to talk about grief and suddenly everybody left the room? Grief Out Loud is opening up this often avoided conversation because grief is hard enough without having to go through it alone. We bring you a mix of personal stories, tips for supporting children, teens, and yourself, and interviews with professionals in the grief world. Platitude and cliche-free, we promise. Grief Out Loud is hosted by me, Jana DeCristofaro, and produced by Dougy Center, the National Grief Center for Children and Families in Portland, Oregon. It's pretty well accepted that grief affects us on many levels, if not all of them, and also that there's no timeline for grief. It changes, of course, but you get to take it with you in some form or another for the rest of your days. But one aspect of this never-ending ride that really doesn't get as many headlines is how grief can show up in all of our other relationships. This was and continues to be true for Daniel. Daniel was 2 days away from turning 8 when his father died of cancer. Daniel knew this was a big deal, but he didn't really understand the enormity of it until he was older. As an 8-year-old, he saw other people having really big reactions, crying and yelling, and he tried to play along, thinking, that's apparently what I'm supposed to be doing right now. Grief looks different for everyone, and for Daniel, it looked like going from being a fearless and impulsive kid to one who was anxious and worried all the time. It also looked like graduating from high school and truly feeling who and what was missing. As he headed into young adulthood, it looked like having trouble trusting and relating to men, which, as a gay man, was kind of a tricky thing. Later on, it looked like a lightning bolt realization that while dating his now husband, Daniel was expecting him to be more paternal than partner. These days, grief looks like volunteering with kids the same age he was when his dad died and thinking, when is this really going to sink in for you? Daniel and I talk about all of this. And since it's June, which means it's Pride season, we also talk about the parallels Daniel's experienced with coming out as gay and coming out as someone who has had a parent die. And yes, these are very different situations with extremely different potential dangers and consequences. But for Daniel, both left him bracing for other people's reactions and feeling othered. And it might be surprising, but thanks to the ongoing taboo around death, telling people he's had a parent die can sometimes be more awkward and challenging than telling them he's gay. Daniel, welcome to Grief Out Loud. Thank you for letting me corral you into having this conversation today.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
And listeners, something you don't know is that Daniel and I actually work together at Dougy Center, but we work in different buildings, so we barely know each other. So this is going to be our opportunity to get to know each other as well.
Yeah, there's a whole patio between us.
Which in classic Dougy Center fashion is a patio filled with names of people who have died in remembrance.
Correct.
So, Daniel, your dad died when you were 8, but what did you know and understand about him when you were a child?
Yeah, so he actually died. I was still technically 7. He died 2 days before my 8th birthday, which is always kind of a funny thing. For me to think about, because I often do that too. I'm just like, how old was I? Was I 7? Was I 8? But I was young. So yeah, I mean, when I think about that time of my life, sort of 0 to, let's say, 7, before he was sick, and I sort of think about my dad, most of my memories and understanding of him are from when he was ill. Those are really ingrained in my mind. I remember a lot of hospital visits. I remember him being weak, and I remember the kind of intensity of that time. But I have a lot of sparse memories from before, and mostly I remember him being incredibly kind and incredibly gentle, a fun person to be around. I remember being very, very excited every day when he would come home from work. I remember hearing the garage door open, and that was the sign that Dad was home from work, and that was really a joyful time in the house. And he would come in. He would always hang out with me and my brother right when he got home from work. So it was a special time. Which again, in retrospect, like now sort of being an adult and thinking about it, you're really tired when you get home from work. And I never felt that. I never got the sense that he was tired from the day or whatever. It was just it was fun times when he got home. And that's mostly what I remember.
So he's perpetually like fun, available dad in your memory.
Yeah, very, very much. I also remember we had two cars and his was the one with air conditioning. And I remember that was very special. It was always a treat when we got to take dad's car anywhere because it had the AC.
What kind of car was it?
It was a Honda. I'm not sure what model, but I remember he had a Honda and my mom drove I think it was a Toyota station wagon. Hers did not have air conditioning.
So, as you grew older, as you are now an adult, what have you come to understand him from this vantage point?
A lot of it tracks. Generally speaking, when someone shares stories about my dad with me, when they share memories, or they're trying to let me know something about him, it's always from this sense of him being a truly wonderful person, someone who was generous and fun, uh, extremely kind, available for people, and just a delight to be around. It's nice. It's nice for me to think like I have this memory of him from a child's point of view, and it seems as though that was fairly universal. That most people had the same sense of him that I did, even though we were coming from greatly different ages. And one of the things that I've often reflected on a lot is that he and my mom were really, really progressive. I was a kid who was very interested in what were sort of more traditionally feminine interests. I was very into the arts. I was very into music, and that was really supported. They both really, really supported that. One of my favorite stories from growing up, I kind of have recollections of this, but my mom remembers it, of course, very vividly. We were at Disneyland. We took a family trip to Disneyland, and we bumped into Cinderella, and we took some pictures with her. And I actually remember her sort of being next to me, and I looked at her and I said, "Hey, can I ask you something?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Can I put on your dress?" And I don't actually remember what she said. She said something back very supportive. I remember that much. Neither one of my parents felt that that was a concern. There was no conversation about it, really, even between I don't think that they talked about it afterwards. And certainly no one made it seem like I shouldn't have asked that question. Really, I think that speaks, this was in the late 80s, and that really speaks to them as parents of a kid who didn't seem to be fitting a mold. And so when I think about my dad in that context, I wish I had gotten to know him better because he sounds like a cool guy.
So, in a sense, there's alignment when other people talk about your dad with your experience of him. So, there's some integrity there, but then it also brings up that deeper longing of, oh, if he really was the cool guy that I remember him to be, how cool would it have been to know him longer?
Absolutely. I wish that I had known him as something other than just a child. I wish that I could have had adult conversations with him and experienced more than just like the young child with a father relationship. But when you kind of reach that point in life where you're almost more peers with your parents, yeah, that's a big part of what I wish and what I miss and what I'm sad about.
Grieving for what you didn't get a chance to have.
Yep.
Looking back, what do you remember about how you as a child responded to like the news about your dad's diagnosis, his illness, and his death?
I remember I remember being upset. I remember being bothered, knowing that he was ill. I I definitely did not get the severity of it. I didn't understand really how significant his illness was. And I remember also thinking it was kind of fun, because our house was full of people all the time. Our house was full of family, friends. I got taken out a lot. I'm sure it happened really frequently that my mom would say, "Hey, can you take the kids? Can you take it, Daniel? Go do something." So I remember that. I remember Beauty and the Beast had it was in theaters during that time. And I was taken to see that movie, I think, like 15 times because I loved it. I thought it was a great movie, and that was one of the things. If people needed something to do with me, we would go see Beauty and the Beast. So in that sense, it's balanced with this sense of it was also kind of a fun time for me, and I think that that also speaks to this idea that I really didn't get it. I was too young to fully understand the significance of it. And I definitely didn't understand his diagnosis. He had a brain tumor. It was a glioblastoma. We were definitely told that he had a brain tumor, and that he had cancer. And I didn't understand that those were two separate things. In fact, for years later, when someone would ask me how he died, I would say he had a brain tumor that became cancer because I didn't get it. I don't know at what age I finally realized that they were the same thing. And I'm sure it was explained to me. I'm sure that it was nothing was hidden from me. But yeah, I was young and I didn't quite get it. And I vividly remember when they told us that he was going to die. And we were at home. My mom and dad, they called us into his room. He was in the bed. My mom was on the bed. And he told us, I don't remember the exact words he used, but he told us that the latest treatments had not been successful and that he wasn't going to make it. And I remember everyone in the room crying really hysterically. It was such an emotional moment. And I didn't cry at all. And I remember feeling like I should be crying. And so I pretended to cry, and I buried my face in the blankets, and I'm pretty sure I like beat my fist on the bed, and I think I even said things, "Oh no, no, no." But that was just because that's what everyone else was doing. And so I didn't fully get it. I knew something, but I truly didn't get how big it was.
Was there a moment or a time period where it did start to become more real for you?
Not until adulthood. Not until adulthood. I changed a lot. I changed a lot after he died. So there were definite signs after he died that I had experienced a huge event and that I had changed as a person. But I didn't really feel that sense of loss until I was an adult. Until there were, I think, sort of the first time that I really hit was, I think, at my high school graduation, where for me it was just incredibly obvious that someone was missing. That I was surrounded by my peers and their families. When I looked at my family, I saw a root that the gap. I saw that something was missing, that someone was missing. And that has carried on well into my adulthood. Anytime that there's even a family dinner or a special event, that's really when I feel the loss. And that's when it hit me, really, once I had entered adulthood.
What's your sense, Daniel, of when you were a kid up until that moment at high school graduation when it really hit you? Was it an active process, a passive process? Was there external buffers? Like, do you have a sense of like what led to you not quite sensing the loss?
Not really. I think that I sensed the loss, just not explicitly. I went from being a really, really impulsive and fearless kid. In fact, that's what my dad was afraid of when my dad worried about me. He was worried because I was super impulsive and super fearless, and he was worried for my physical safety, that I was going to hurt myself. Those are not words that I would ever use to describe myself currently, or when I think back about my childhood. And that changed then. So I went from being this headstrong, fearless kid to a kid who was really anxious and a kid who was really worried all the time. So that was how I experienced the loss after he died. And it really wasn't, it was a gradual process for me into adulthood to then realize, oh, well, that's why. I mean, I experienced this big trauma and my life was turned upside down. That's what created all of these changes. And it was how I was experiencing the loss without explicitly being like, I am mourning for my father, or I am in grief because my father has died.
So there were a lot of changes, just not maybe a conscious through line to like the origin or the precipitation of those changes.
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure everyone around me knew it. I just didn't know it myself. I think it was definitely clear to the adults in my life that that's what was going on. But I didn't really make that connection. In fact, I think it was probably even told to me, like, you're feeling this way because you lost your father. I didn't feel that. I didn't necessarily think that that was true. Now I do, but at the time, it wasn't that clear to me.
You mentioned that your dad died just 2 days before you turned 8. And I'm curious how your dad's death has changed your relationship to your birthday.
Forever changed, forever changed. The two go hand in hand, and it's been a struggle. I've never liked my birthday. I've never looked forward to my birthday. It's never something that I get excited about. It's not something I want to celebrate, and I think it's because I always knew that 2 days before my birthday, I was going to have to go through the remembrance of the day he died. And it's almost like I kind of knew April 2nd was coming up. And so when April 2nd had finished and then April 4th was around the corner, I had like a day. I had April 3rd to basically be like, okay, now I can think about my birthday. So I never wanted to make plans. I never wanted to think of gifts that I wanted for myself. I really, if I could have gone without celebrating my birthday, I would have. A lot of times I did it just because I felt like I was supposed to. And just recently, I decided, because of this, because I really just didn't, I never liked this. I never liked that these two events went so hand in hand, and that kind of because of their closeness, I wasn't able to give either of them the thought that they really warranted. I decided to change the day that I celebrate my birthday. And so I celebrate my birthday in May because I was born 6 weeks early. I decided, you know what? I'm just going to take my original due date, which was May 10th. And I'm like, okay, May 10th is going to be my birthday. It's been a tremendous help for me. And it's sort of rekindled this idea of like, okay, yeah, like I can look forward to my birthday and I can acknowledge my dad's death day without thinking, okay, well, my birthday is around the corner too. And it's been kind of a bumpy journey, but a good journey too, and really a good change.
We often talk about how grief impacts everything in our lives, but in particular relationships. And just wondering what role has grief played in shaping your relationships?
So I think about the kind of two kinds of relationships that I have. And I have my everyday interpersonal relationships, my friendships, and then I have my romantic relationships. Interpersonally and with my friendships, really, since my dad died, I have had a very difficult time and a general mistrust of men. My closest friends have always been women. And that changed after my dad died. When I was young, when I was before he died, I was one of the boys. I was very all of my good friends growing up were all boys. I was friends with girls, but my best friends were all definitely boys. After he died, that was when I think that big shift changed. And I just, even now in my day-to-day life, I really have a difficult time connecting with men, feeling authentic around men, feeling like I can be myself, and feeling trustworthy. And I've often tried to kind of do a deep dive into this and try to figure out why that might be. The closest I've come to it is that I think that it's really common for parents to tell their kids, "I'll always be there for you. I'll always be around." And I'm sure that my dad at one point said something like that to me that I internalized, and then he died, and he was no longer there. And I think it's possible that I just somehow really held on to that, which then led to me having this difficulty connecting and feeling safe and secure around men, which has been a fascinating thing for me as a gay man because I'm attracted to that gender. And it's absolutely then influenced my romantic relationships. I do think that unconsciously in my relationships, I have sometimes tried to kind of fill that missing gap. I didn't realize it until kind of later in life. But when I think back about how I was, particularly in my first few relationships, and kind of the disappointments that I had, the struggles that I had, I do think that elements of that loss were kind of seeping in there. And I specifically remember when I was dating my now husband, and in the beginning of our relationship, and I was sort of going through that same thing. I was feeling like he wasn't doing certain things, or that he wasn't saying certain things, or that in certain situations he was acting differently than I would have liked. And I realized that it's because he was not doing fatherly things. And that was that connection. And I remember once I made that realization, I kind of had a little light bulb moment, and I was like, wait a minute, Daniel, you're looking for a partner. You're not looking for a father. And that was a huge moment for me. And it was unexpected. And another way that this huge event, this life changing thing that happened when I was a kid, just really influenced and continues to influence my life.
I keep thinking about what you said of like having that light bulb moment of like, oh, I'm expecting, this guy to do fatherly things or
Mm-hmm.
say fatherly things. Is there an example of something like that?
I wish I could. I wish I could remember specifically what it was that led me to that realization, and I just don't. I've been racking my brain trying to think what it was. But I do know that was the connection. A lot of my sense of worry in the relationship, a lot of my sense of disappointment, was coming from whatever I was looking for on a more sort of paternalistic level instead of a separate independent partner.
Are there ways in which that, I think you talked about that idea of it's hard to trust men because my dad disappeared. Is there, I mean, he died, but as an 8-year old, it's basically somebody disappears from your life. And are there ways in which that fear or that vigilance that like your husband could disappear or someone else in your life could disappear continue to play out?
100%. I live my life expecting a worst case scenario very, very much. And that can be as small as, I'm getting in the car to run to Trader Joe's. I could get in a horrible accident. To anyone could die at any moment. I think that kind of as we get older, I think it's more common for those kind of thoughts to seep in, even if you haven't had a death experience in your life. but that's always been there for me. I've always been afraid that someone close to me was going to die at any given moment. I mean, I remember being a kid once. This was after my dad died. I think relatively soon after he died, and I was at school, and on the playground there was a big crowd of kids running to one end of the playground, and I heard people talking about a fire, and so I sort of followed them, and I was very, very scared. Sure enough, like off, we were all kind of at the edge of the school, and way, way, way off in the distance, there was this like tiny little plume of smoke coming up. And most kids were really excited. They were looking at it, they were fascinated by it. I was absolutely terrified. I was absolutely terrified that that fire was somehow going to reach us at the school, that we were going to have to evacuate. And I called my mom. I ran to the office and I called my mom, told her what was going on, and asked if she would come. And she came. She came and she spent the rest of the day in class with me. And I'm pretty sure I was in third grade when that happened. So it was probably still within the first year after he died. And that was, yeah, it was just that worst case scenario, something awful is going to happen mindset.
Has your husband had to adapt in terms of how he communicates his comings and his goings to you?
Um, he's had to adapt to a lot. um, I mean, I think that we've always, even this aside, we've always been pretty good about checking in with each other when we arrive or are departing someplace. So fortunately, I think that was already kind of a given. We didn't have to make any changes there. But he is fully aware. He's aware that that's where my mind goes, and is often sort of the balance to that. I will often, if something is going on, I will flat out ask. I will explain it to him and I'll flat out ask, is this a real concern, or is this me really thinking that something awful is going to happen? And almost always it's me kind of expecting the worst. And then of course my mind goes into the, okay, well, that's great to know. What happens when you die and I don't have that balance anymore? Who am I going to ask? So it's, it's the aftermath of experiencing a death.
I love the idea of having an in-home fact checker. I would
Yeah,
like to rent
very much.
him.
Very much. And he's lovely. I mean, he's so level-headed and he's much more prone to a balanced approach to most things. So I do rely on that a lot. It definitely helps keep me keep me level too.
You've talked about how coming out as a gay man has parallels to kind of coming out as someone who's grieving. Can you say a little more about that?
Yeah, I thought about this quite a lot because I only just made this connection really recently, because they're very different. They're very, very different in scope, but they are they're both ways that identify you as an other. In both situations, I found that I didn't know how the other person was going to respond when I told them. I didn't know if they were going to say the right thing back to me, or if they even knew what to say back to me, for either of those situations. And I think that death, just like coming out, it's kind of a taboo subject. It's not necessarily something that's at the forefront of conversations. And so there are a lot of parallels there. I remember, even still currently, but growing up a lot, if I would meet someone new, they would say, "Oh, are your parents still together?" I remember being like, "Well, no, but not for the reason that you think." A lot of times when I would be like, "Oh, well, actually, my dad died when I was really young," and seeing the kind of surprise on the other person's face, which then led myself to often just not want to have that conversation. If it came up, or even now in my adult life, they'll be, "Oh, where do your parents live?" And a lot of times I'll just lie about it. If I don't really feel like getting into the truth of it, I'll be like, oh yeah, they live in Portland, instead of really getting into it. And that was, was kind of similar before I came out, when people would ask, oh, do you have a girlfriend? I would say no, or I would, or if they asked me, what actresses do you think are hot? I would just make something up, because that was easier than explaining it, or getting into it, or going into that vulnerable state. And I surprisingly also had, in both situations, when I came out as gay and when I shared that my father was dead, I've had people say, I don't believe you. Which, this was when I was a teenager mostly. But yeah, I got that response. I found my reaction to both of those, even though they're wildly different things, kind of what went on in me internally, to be very similar.
What do you say when someone says, I don't believe you, to either one of those?
I mean, I'm pretty sure I was like, why? Why don't you believe me? And generally the response back was, I just don't believe you. And I was like, okay, I'm out. Like, I can't do this work for you.
I didn't need any more clear messaging about where this conversation is going, which is nowhere.
Yeah.
Has there been like a ratio in terms of who responds better? Like the people that you've come out to as gay, or the people that you've come out to as having your dad die when you were 8? Do people tend to do better in one of those conversations than the other?
I mean, they probably at this point do better with me acknowledging that I'm gay. I don't think it's ever really a surprise to people that I'm gay. So, and now, I mean, I did my coming out, as I came out when I was 14, and I did the bulk of my like traditional coming out, really in that sort of finite period. And after that, I just kind of lived my truth. Like, I didn't, if someone asked me, I would be honest. But I didn't hide anything. I didn't make it seem like that I wasn't. And so now, I mean, as queer people, we come out on a fairly daily basis. Like, you meet someone new, and I mention my husband, that's coming out. And I don't really know how that other person is going to respond. Most likely, I've always found myself in pretty positive spaces. So, it's rare that I'm going to have a poor reaction to that. With sharing that my father is dead, it's more awkward, especially as an adult. And I'm more prone to get just kind of a confused, like, oh wow. And a lot of times that just kind of it ends there. And I think it's because death is still kind of a taboo subject. So people don't know what to say. They don't know what kind of follow-up questions to ask to that, even if they're curious. Because I think we're kind of programmed not to, that death is a private thing, that it's rude to ask questions, which I would. I mean, if someone then asked, oh, how did he die? I would be completely fine answering that. But I think a lot of us are not comfortable asking that.
Daniel, do you have a sense, if any, of like how because you said you came out pretty much to most folks when you were 14,
Mm-hmm.
how your dad being alive may have shifted or changed that in some way?
The main thing that I don't really wonder about how he would have reacted. Just given everything that I know about the man, I am 100% sure that he would have been phenomenally supportive of me. I often wonder how my own realization and then coming out journey would have been different, if it would have been faster, if it would have been slower, if it would have been easier or harder. It's kind of, I think about there. It's sort of a big component of my life was missing, that could have impacted that whole process for me. And so that's kind of what I think about. In terms of my overall identity as a gay man, I don't necessarily think of it having a huge impact, other than, like I talked about before, my relationships, and kind of how the loss impacted my relationships. But in terms of my overall identity, it doesn't really factor in as much as it might seem.
So prior to coming to Dougie Center as an employee, you started out with the organization as a volunteer facilitator, working directly in a group for younger kids, 4 to 8 years old. So kids who are around the same age you were when your dad died. And I just wonder, like, being in the room with those kids and listening to them tell their stories and watching them play out their grief, what did you learn about 8-year-old Daniel?
It was wild. And I think very poetic that that was the group I was placed in, because it was me. I mean, I was essentially looking at myself, which was a surreal thing to happen. What really struck me the most was how vastly different everyone experiences their grief. I imagine that if I had been an 8-year old coming to Dougie Center, it would have been playtime for me. It would have been a fun place for me to go. I would have been one of the kids who was full of energy and having fun. But I certainly saw kids in my group who were much more outwardly sad, who were having a harder time, who were less likely to share, less likely to open up. So I think that's really what it taught me about grief in general, and kind of my own grief, in the sense that you can't necessarily pick out the kids who are grieving. And I think that's when I think about myself as a kid, I don't think that I would have been picked out as a kid who had experienced a tremendous loss or was actively grieving. But that there is no sort of one size fits all for grief. And it was difficult. I think the hardest thing for me, really, as a facilitator with that age group, was I have a sense of what's coming for those kids. I have a sense of, sort of broadly speaking, what their journey might look like. If I take my experience, there are certain paths that those kids could go on, that would parallel my own. And so I thought about that a lot. It was an interesting thing, and there were many times where I just sort of had to come back into the present, check myself, because they're me.
Mm. So you find yourself forecasting for them of the day they graduate high school or the day that they have this significant event happen, of what it's going to be like for them.
Yes. And all that in the context of realizing that grief is an individualized journey. And so it's not like that's going to happen to them. But I definitely went down that sort of what if, or this, at what point are you really going to realize the significance of this? Because I'm not sure that you get it now, just as I didn't get it when I was that age.
That they can get it as 8-year-olds, and then eventually they're going to get it at 16-year-olds and get it again as 25-year-olds. And what that looks like will be different for each of them, because we're all different at those different ages.
Yeah.
So what else? What else do you want us to know about your experience as Daniel, the 8-year-old, well, almost 8, 7 and 363-day-old Daniel, whose dad died of cancer? Daniel as an adult, like, what else do you want us to know?
I think the main thing that I hope to share with people, which I already sort of touched upon, is that it is truly a never-ending process. That grief doesn't just go away. I mean, we talk about this a lot at Dougie Center. This idea that we live in this culture that really wants us to sort of grieve and then get over it. And I've really felt that much more recently in life. This idea that it really it doesn't ever go away. And I was thinking, I mean, even yesterday I was reflecting on, there were a few people in my life who really became father figures after my dad died, who sort of stepped in to that role. And that brought up a whole lot of emotion, thinking about all of it, about me as a kid, about me as an adult, about them as an adult, realizing that there was this need and all of that. And it made me really emotional, which just hits home this idea that it is a never ending process. I want anyone who's grieving to be okay in that space. It comes and it goes, and you have ups and you have downs, and there are so many different ways that grief is expressed, and that it's all valid. It's all valid. Um, and you don't need to explain what you're feeling. You need to have sort of ownership of making other people understand what you're going through, because it never ends and it changes, and it is truly it's a journey.
Well, Daniel, now I feel like we should change the podcast name from Grief Out Loud to Grief Never Ends. But well, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really lovely to get to know you more since we see each other, but we haven't actually had an in-depth conversation about all the things that matter most. So yeah, thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you. It's been a beautiful experience, and I'm so happy that we had this opportunity.
And listeners out there, I know you know this. Thank you for being part of our community, for tuning into the show, for sharing episodes with people who might be helped in some way by what we're talking about here. Reach out to me if you want to. My email is griefoutloud@dougie.org. I really love to hear from people about how the show is impacting you. And our website is also dougie.org. So it's dougy.org. And that is a great place to find information about our local programming, programs that we're aware of around the country and the world that are similar to ours, all the past episodes of Grief Out Loud, and all of our free downloadable resources. I'm excited, as always, to share that our podcast is sponsored in part by the Chester Stephan Endowment Fund. Thanks again for listening. We hope you'll join us again next time.